Hi guys! Welcome to True Crime Wine Wednesday, but it's a Thursday. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherilyn and I am so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining us every single Wednesday, except for it's a Thursday. You know what? I love and I appreciate you guys so much. I know you all always have my back and support me no matter what, and you always just want to make sure like my mental health is just like at the forefront of everything that I do. So I know you guys understand when I miss an upload or I switch the days, but I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you. It kills me to miss that schedule because I know you guys count on it and I look forward to it too. So please trust me, as much as you don't like it, I don't like it either. I have great news though. We found a home. So very soon I will be back to more of a regular routine and I can't wait to show it and share it with you guys. So again, just thank you for all your patience the last couple months with all of the roller coaster of emotions and curveballs that we've been thrown. All right, riddle time. Two men are locked in a house together. They are told the first man that starves to death loses. The other man will be free to go. Eventually, one man starves to death, but they're unable to tell the other man he won. Why? I feel like there's going to be like a lot of good scenarios in this one. I can't wait to hear your answers as always. One thing I want to mention that I loved so much from last week's riddle was so many of you tied it to The Princess Bride, and I was just like, oh my god, I gotta watch The Princess Bride now. That's why I just love your guys' answers so much, because they're so different and then a lot of them make sense, and then I'm like, oh, that actually should be the answer. I like it more. So keep those answers coming. We are going to jump right in it today. Before we get started, Sherilyn has a message for you. Before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor, Raycon. These bad boys could not have been introduced into my life at a better time. We've got a couple vacations on the to-do list, and after packing 15 pieces of luggage from our last escapade, we have vowed from now on we pack as light as humanly possible, and that includes carry-on. Not only is it compact, but these earbuds don't kill my ears. I don't know about you, but I find when I wear bulky headphones, it like only takes like 20 minutes before I feel like I'm in a vice. And then the backs of my ears get sore, like right here. It's very tough to explain, but I'm just like not a fan. And then when I tried to use the headphones that come with my phone, like they're so hard and like the plastic, it just like hurts the cartilage. I guess I'm very sensitive in the ear department, but it is an issue for me. So what I like about Raycon earbuds is that it comes with a variety of different gel tips, so it can perfectly fit your ear. It's nice because you don't have to constantly be adjusting them. They pop in so nice and easy, and then they're like in there. These are the new everyday earbuds and they're just so sleek. They're like almost like a velvety, I can't really explain them. They're just so like buttery. Primarily I've been using mine when I edit just because I love to have background noise of some sorts when I'm working. So usually I'll listen to a show or a podcast. And these are perfect to edit in because they have 8 hours of playtime, which is usually what it takes for me to edit a video. And then they have a 32-hour battery life. I've even been more on top of my phone calls, not like a lot of people call me. Primarily, I like to answer when scammers call me and then I mess with them for a while. So I've been on top of my game with that because all you have to do is just click a button and then you can use the built-in mic and just go to town. Huge bonus to these is that they start at half the price of other premium brands and they sound just as good. And they have a 45-day happiness guarantee. So you have plenty of time to make sure that you love them too. On top of the already great price, Raycon is hooking up my True Crime fam. Just click the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/SherilynDale to unlock exclusive deals up to 20% off your Raycon order. Thank you so much again, Raycon, for these amazing earbuds and for sponsoring today's video. Okay, you guys, let's get started and brace yourselves. Buckle the F in. This is another one where you're gonna leave just not knowing who you can trust in the world. It will definitely require copious amounts of snacks, pop, or soda. You're gonna be vigorously rubbing and scrubbing if you're cleaning your house right now. In my case, I've already started on the wine, so grab what you need and let's get going. Like I said, this is one of the most devastating and just shocking cases I've come across in a long time. I mean, they're all devastating and shocking, but you know what I mean. It makes you want to just like live in a hole that you like dig and bury in your backyard and just like not ever leave it because you're just like, well, like who's left out there to like trust and be friends with? It's so infuriating, and It also was very close to never being solved because the killer was someone no one would have expected, not even the victims. Yes, victims. 4 young adults who were just starting that next chapter in their life. They had their whole life ahead of them. You're in your early 20s. You're just like bracing that new independence. And then in an instant, it was all taken away when they were found brutally murdered in Clear Lake City, Texas on July 18th, 2003. The bodies were discovered when a really good friend of one of the victims couldn't get a hold of her, and she just had a sense that something was wrong. She had spoken to her friend's boyfriend earlier on in the day, and he said that she was just in the shower and she'd give her a shout when she got out, and a couple hours had passed and she realized she didn't hear back from her, which was just really unlike her. So she kept calling, trying to get through, no answer. She started calling her boyfriend, and now he wasn't answering. So she just had that voice in her head, go and check on them. She rounds up her boyfriend. They head to her friend's house, see her and her boyfriend's car in the driveway, and that gut feeling just amplified. She starts peeking in the window. She's banging on the doors. No one's answering. She tries the door and it's unlocked. So she walks in and she just feels the air is heavy. Like just something is eerie. Like everything is too still. She's slowly walking through. She's calling for her friend. No answer. And her boyfriend's behind her making his way to the front door. All of a sudden, she just turns around, books it outside. She's screaming. She's in absolute shock, just repeating like, oh my God, call 911, call 911. She had just walked into a nightmare. Not only did she find her friend, but she found 3 other victims, and there was just blood everywhere. A neighbor hears this commotion outside and immediately calls 911. When the police arrive, they come across one of the most bloodiest scenes they had ever seen, and one of the most emotional, just seeing 4 young victims whose lives ended this way. The first matter of business was identifying them, and they quickly find out that the house belongs to Tiffany Rowells, who was one of the victims and whose friend discovered her, along with her friend Rachel Colorutis, her boyfriend Marcus Priscilla, and his cousin Adelbert Sanchez. On the surface, nothing stood out or made any sense. They were all kind, beautiful, and for the most part, just good kids that didn't get into any trouble. Tiffany Rowell had experienced quite a bit of loss in her life, and it's something that could have made her very vengeful, very spiteful, but everybody that met her just said hands down she was one of the kindest people they'd ever met. When she was a young girl, she was adopted by a couple named Sally and Chester Rawell. Chester was a musician, Sally was a stay-at-home mom. I couldn't find a whole lot of information on their early family life, but at one point in Tiffany's childhood, her mother and father separated and he remarried and moved away, which appeared to bring her and her mom very close. They had and counted on each other, did everything together, and then one day out of the blue, they get devastating news. Her mom had been diagnosed with lung cancer. And I think the fact that her mom had never smoked a day in her life made that news just like harder to deal with. The cancer spread really fast, and their mother-daughter bond, even though it wasn't biological, it was so close that the morning Tiffany's mom had passed, she just woke up and knew. She said something about that day felt very different, and as heartbreaking as it was for her, there also was that sense of relief because she had seen her mom the day before, and she was in so much pain. She had seen her deteriorate so fast, but this last time she saw her, it took everything in her, and she turned and she looked at Tiffany and she gave her this big smile, and like you just know that it took everything in her to get it out, and it had been a smile that Tiffany hadn't seen for a while, so she just held on to it. So that moment really helped her get through and just remind her that she wasn't suffering anymore. After Sally passed, Tiffany continued living in the family home, and her boyfriend Marcus moved in because she was 19 years old. Tiffany had recently graduated and she was hoping to be a social worker. In the meantime, she was working as a waitress at a topless bar with her best friend Rachel at a club called Club Exotica. She and Rachel met at Clear Lake High School in 1999. Oh, the 90s. They were soul sisters. It actually sounds like the first time I met my best friend, just that like instant connection, as if they knew each other their whole entire lives. I also met my best friend in high school too, and it was that bond where you're like, what did I do without you all this other time? The two of them were what people would consider like head of the popular group. They were the gorgeous girls that every girl wanted to be. They were the ones that all the guys wanted to date. But it wasn't something that they let get to their head. They were just over the top sweet. sweet. They liked everyone. They got along with everyone. They would make sure to go and say hi to different people in different cliques. No one was off limits, and everyone just really loved them. Rachel is the daughter of Anne and George Colorudis. Her dad was a hard worker. He grew up in a military family, had that strict regimen, traveled the world. When he got older, he settled in Washington, where he met Anne and married her, and they had 3 daughters. They relocated to Texas for his job, and they chose Clearwater. Do I keep calling it Clearwater? It's Clear Lake. And when he describes his family, he just describes it as absolutely wonderful. Out of the 3 girls, Rachel was a mama's girl. The other 2 were more glued to dad, but Rachel and her mom had a really special bond. He said when she was little, she was very chill, very docile. She loved Barbies, playing with dolls. She loved the color purple. As she grew into herself, she was still very sweet and had a very big heart, but she was very stubborn and set in her ways. She was social, very social. She loved going to the movies with her friends, going out for dinner. She was also artistic. She liked to doodle and draw on anything in front of her. And she was very close with her older sister, who was a year older than her. When they were growing up, they were attached at the hip and so close that they even made up their own secret language. The family was very active in their church as well. Anne and her girls were even members of the church theater group and put on performances for their community. As she got older, Rachel started helping out with the younger girls in the youth group, and she became a camp counselor at one of the church camps as well. I want to read an excerpt from one of the books that I read that her sister shared with the author. The book is called Never See Them Again by M. Williams Phelps, and her sister says, Rachel was silly and loved a practical joke. She hated to wear socks or shoes. She liked whipped cream straight out of the can. She had this way of drawing people into her everywhere she went. She was caring, but would rather help you smile than cry with you. She always reminded me that we were a team, that we were always on each other's side. She was completely loyal to her family and to her beliefs. She believed that mistakes were used to help teach other people. She told me that so many times. She always had chipped paint on her nails, and she could never get to bed on time. She hated to run but loved to dance, and she was so proud of her sisters and always told us that. She made sure to let us know that we were important. She'd spend every day lying by a pool, eating chips and salsa if she could. When Rachel got to high school, her family saw a little bit of a change in her, as most families do. She was interested in going to parties more, very focused on improving her looks. She got her sister to teach her how to style her hair, do her makeup. She got braces. If she could have gone to every party every weekend, she would have. But her parents were strict and they did limit her social time. So around the time of graduation, she did start pushing the limits and rebelling a little bit. I read that her father thinks that part of this had to do with some medication that she was on. I never found the exact name, but just by reading it, I think it was Accutane. And it can have really severe side effects. Severe mood swings is one of them, which Rachel was experiencing. And this is when that treatment was really new and not too much was known about it. And Rachel was started off on a really high dose. So, when you think about it, it definitely could have a lot to do with it. It also could have just been rebellion and being in that stage of life. We'll never know. Whatever it was, Rachel was wanting to spend less time away from her family and just more time on her own with her friends, have that sense of independence. And this was when Tiffany was living on her own. So Rachel wanted to go and live in this house with her best friend. As much as her family didn't really like the path that she was on, she was 18. So the mentality was, you got to let her go, learn these things on her own, make her own mistakes, grow from them. As much as they didn't want her out of the house, they also felt like they couldn't, tie her down and keep her there. She'd been out of the house living with Tiffany for a few months, and the family was really desperate to have her back. There was just a part of that family unit that was missing. Her parents wanted her back so bad that they actually asked her older sister to come home from college to see if she could kind of talk to her. It sounds like Rachel was starting to feel the same on her end. She had called the house, but no one was home, so she left a voicemail for her mom saying that she just called to talk to her mom and her sister to let her know that she loved them, that she missed them, and that she would call them back. That same day, she also sent an email to her dad. In the email, she said that she was looking forward to getting together, but there was a part of her that was a little bit nervous to face everyone. I think she was feeling, maybe just a little bit, I don't think embarrassed, by leaving and making that decision, but You know that age, like where you're just like, oh, I'm going on my own, all grown up, I know what I'm doing. And then you really do start missing home, and you're just kind of like, oh, well, yeah, like my parents kind of were right. And you don't want to like go back with like your tail between your legs at home. So the email was kind of like, I'm considering what you said. I'd like to come home, visit you guys, see you. I don't want it to be weird. Love you, miss you, that kind of thing. At the end of the email, she signed it off as she always did and said, always your little girl, Rach. It always makes it harder to learn those personal details because it just makes you think like, what if, right? What if she just like went home that day, ran home? Would it have changed the outcome entirely? Would it have changed her fate? Same with Marcus and his cousin Adelbert, who they call D. I'll refer to him as D. His sister said she and D were raised by doting parents. Like, she fully admits they were spoiled. They had anything and everything they could possibly want. They were also a close-knit family. They would do like an annual camping trip all together every year. His sister shared a story that she would always tease him because he needed to be like the freshest all the time, even when they went on these camping trips. He would pack like he was going on like a full-fledged vacay, and they'd be gone for the weekend. And they're in the woods for like 2 nights. But he'd just be like, you always have to be looking your best. He liked his stuff like crisp and clean, whether they were in the woods or not, and he would even do costume changes. She said ladies loved him. He loved the ladies too. His dreams and aspirations were to be a big rapper, and he was laser focused on making it happen. He was always really close with his cousin Marcus. Growing up, it sounds like they kind of grew up more like siblings than cousins. Even when Marcus's family moved away from Dee's family, it was about an hour away from them. They still made the effort to see each other almost every single weekend. He was 21 years old. He had just gotten his diploma from night school, and his sister was one of his best friends. He was actually at her house when Marcus called to hang out with him. She said this night specifically, unlike any other time she said goodbye to him, before she said goodbye, she said, hey, be safe. And he just smiled at her and he just said, I always am. And I guess Marcus kind of like peeks his head around the corner. He's like, yeah, and I'm there too. I'll take good care of him. She said she feels like he must have sensed she was a little bit upset, and she never had been like that before. So he walked over, gave her a little hug, gave her a little kiss on her forehead. He walked away, and then he just looked back and he said, I love you. Don't worry. We'll be safe, and I'll see you soon. She went to bed that night, and in the morning she wakes up and starts her day. By early afternoon, she got a little bit upset because he still hadn't called, but she figured, okay, like maybe he, met a lady. Perhaps they were having some breakfast. He'd call her later. The rest of the day goes on. She and her parents are watching the evening news, and they see this news segment come up of this quadruple murder, but it was an area that none of them were familiar with. So like in terms of a personal connection, there wasn't a concern, but they made note of it. They were just like, oh my gosh, like how awful. The next morning, her parents and her older sister left for a fishing trip, and originally she was going to go too, but she decided to stay behind because she still hadn't talked to Dee. That evening, she wakes up to a phone call from her cousin, Marcus's sister, and she tells her that Marcus and Dee were shot the night before. Not only is she devastated, but there's that added element of she's by herself, like her parents and her sister are gone on this camping trip. She's digesting this news all alone, and she has to be the one to just give them this heartbreaking news. I can't even imagine how devastating that would be for somebody. News spreads fast in the community, and quickly it gets to Rachel's parents, who hear that 4 victims were found. So they head straight there, praying the entire time that Rachel wasn't in the house. This was just less than an hour of Rachel's dad and her older sister having lunch, trying to figure out like how they were going to approach asking her to come back home. Reading about her father talking about this moment is just so sad. He was desperately trying to get in the house, and the police were pulling him back, and it was so bad that they were like, please just cooperate. Like, you do not want to go in there. This is honestly for your best interest. Police had already been through there, and they knew that it appeared like Rachel had received the worst injuries and attack. She had substantial blunt force trauma. She had at least 12 gunshot wounds in several different areas, suggesting that she was, running for her life. The whole scene was just like overkill. There was around 40 shots that were fired, but from the bullets remaining, it gave the investigators their first clue that it appeared like it came from 2 different guns. Really, the only comfort that these investigators can give the family members is that they are never going to give up and they're going to do everything that they can to bring justice to their children, which on the surface sounds like, easy, but it was really difficult. There was no signs of a robbery. Every one of them was wearing jewelry. There were valuables in the house. So at first sight, they went on the idea that it was a drug deal gone wrong, which, like most families, really upset them. They knew that it was unrealistic to believe that, a house of 18-year-olds, they weren't going to party or like experiment with like marijuana and stuff like that. But they didn't want the first impression to be that they were like these troublemakers who were drug dealers and a danger to the community. There was a period of time that they thought maybe a customer at the club that the girls worked at were stalking one of them and came into the house trying to find one of the girls, saw everybody else, and it was like one of those everyone was in the wrong place at the wrong time thing. And then they also floated the idea that maybe the targets were the guys and not the girls. When detectives canvassed the neighborhood, they find a couple who were Tiffany's neighbors who said that earlier that day, they did notice 2 people standing outside of Tiffany's house. They said they were in black, they had like their hoods up, which they thought was a little bit odd because it was pretty warm. They said it was a boy and a girl, and they appeared to be in their late teens, early 20s. I guess Tiffany's house was known as not like a party house, but friends came and went, and the neighbors were used to it, but just like the way that they were kind of like pacing off the side of the house at first, and then they were like peeking in Tiffany's truck before they went up the driveway and went in. It looked odd to them. So it was something that they made note of. That day they left a little while after to go have dinner, and it was on their way back from dinner while they're like pulling into their driveway that they see just chaos with all of the police cars and like the crowd of neighbors that were all around Tiffany's house now. After they give a statement, they meet with a sketch artist and give the best description that they can of these 2 individuals. But initially, the photos weren't released. It was only shown to the family members, and police just wanted to see if any of the people on the page like stood out to them, if it could have been somebody that the girls knew. But when the family looked at it, no one came to mind. These murders really affected the community. There were tons of phone calls coming in, finding out, like where things were at, if they're closer to solving it. A lot of tips were being called in, like tip on top of tip on top of tip. It was overwhelming for the police. Everybody was calling about somebody they knew. A mom even called about her son because she said that they were talking about it and she felt like he knew more about the case than was being released on the news. Like literally everybody was calling. And even if it sounded like something that, just didn't really make sense, it still had to be followed up with. So every theory that was being called in, the investigators had to look into it, which means that it took 3 years to find the suspect. During this whole entire time, though, Rachel's father stayed in constant contact with the investigators. He was always checking in, seeing where things were at, seeing if he could help with anything. He even hit the streets and did like his own investigation, interrogated people on the streets. His explanation was, a part of it was that obviously he wanted to solve his daughter's murder, but he felt like if he just wasn't doing something and he was just still, it would allow him to process and accept like what actually happened, and he didn't want to go there. It eventually did get to the point where no more leads were coming in. It had been about 2 years. So Rachel's father raised enough money to put out a $100,000 reward through Crime Stoppers. This reopens like a whole new flood of leads. One woman called, she said she was clairvoyant and there would be clues that would lead to the killer somewhere at a riverbank. Several tips came in about a specific drug dealer in the area who had like light association with Marcus, so that was where things were focused for quite a while. People were even pointing the finger at Rachel's Rachel's dad because of how involved he was. And they were saying that, he was trying to stay close to the case so that he could see like where things were at and make sure they weren't like on his tail. As it feels like lead after lead is going nowhere, an anonymous tip is called in that now starts to shift the narrative. They had been laser focused on solving this by connecting it to drug dealers, and this caller threw a curveball because he said that he was friends with a guy named Chris Schneider, and one night he and Chris were really drunk, and he started telling him that him and his girlfriend Christine were involved in a quadruple murder. Almost as fast as this new lead comes in and they have this new direction to go to, their investigation was completely derailed by the natural disaster that was Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita that devastated the area. Because of how many lives and homes were devastated by this, it halted the investigation. What was happening was a lot of new crimes were spurring, and it was hard for law enforcement to stay on top of it because they're also busy trying to like rebuild their community. So it wasn't until another tip came in that was just about on the 3rd anniversary of the murders that the case would finally start moving. This time it was a different caller. It was somebody who was calling saying that he met a girl named Christine Paolilla in treatment, and she confessed to him to being involved in a quadruple murder. The detective's ears kind of perked up because now there's like another person saying the name Christine, and this caller also had a detail that had never been shared with the public that they said Christine told him, and that was that right before Rachel had died, she had reached her arm out for her cell phone that was close by, and she had actually dialed 911 on the keypad but didn't have time to press send. And that's because Christine had come back into the house to double check that everybody was dead, found her alive, and finished her job. As soon as the detectives get this information, they go to Rachel and Tiffany's family and they're like, do you guys know a Christine? And they're all like, well, yeah, of course we do, but there's no way she's involved. She's one of Tiffany and Rachel's best friends. Like, they changed her life and she was so grateful to them. They were the only two people in the world for a long time that showed Christine love and acceptance when she couldn't even show herself any of that. Christine was born in Long Island, New York on March 31st, 1986 to Lori, who was a stay-at-home mom, and Charles Paolilla. Charles was a construction worker. When Christine was only 2 years old, her father died in a tragic work accident when a bunch of bricks crushed him. Her mom really struggled with the loss of her husband, and Christine would spend a lot of time kind of bouncing from relatives' houses because her mom just couldn't cope. And if that wasn't hard enough, when she was 5 years old, she woke up one morning and there was just clumps of hair all over her pillow. She also lost all of her eyebrows and her eyelashes and was quickly diagnosed with alopecia. Because of the hair loss, she wore wigs. She also had really poor vision, so she wore really thick glasses. And kids were awful to her in school. They would do things like rip her wig off and just like run around with it. Not only is she dealing with this at school, but at home she had a lot on her plate too because of everything that her mom was going through emotionally after her father passed. She just couldn't handle it, and she coped with using drugs to just numb the pain. A lot of the pressure on Christine's mom's shoulders was financial. Her husband had a life insurance policy, but the sole beneficiary was Christine, and she didn't have any access to it until she was 18 years old. So just dealing with the loss of her husband, the struggles of not having any money, she turned to drugs, which a lot of people do in these situations. You know, you have this vision that your life is going to be perfectly mapped out and you've got it all figured out, and to lose your spouse who you think you're going to be with forever, like just like so suddenly and tragically, is not at all uncommon for people to just numb themselves like that. It got to the point that it was so bad that Christine had to go and live with her grandparents when she was 6 years old, and it made her feel abandoned. She felt like she didn't really fit anywhere either. She really had gone through a lot in a short amount of time. You know, her father passes Her mother became dependent on drugs. It caused her to be absent and not there for her. She's diagnosed with this traumatic condition for a little girl. She was also diagnosed with ADD, which made it really difficult for her to concentrate on things, so she struggled in school. And then back to back, her grandparents passed away. So she felt like every time she started to depend on somebody or become close to them, they left her. Things started to turn around for Christine when she turned 15 years old, though. Her mom had worked really, really hard to go through treatment and just get her life back on track. So she asked Christine to give her another chance and to move back in with her and her new husband, who she had remarried. Christine noticed how hard her mom worked to be even stronger than she was before, so she agreed to give it a shot, and the family decided to move to Clear Lake for a new start. When she first moves there, she meets this bad boy named Chris Snyder. I don't mean to say it like rude. It's just like all the sounds. It's hard to, you guys know, I can't like ever talk normally. So like when the sounds blend together, like it's difficult. Chris Snyder. He had a criminal record already and he was using hard drugs. He also wasn't someone people would describe as like warm and fuzzy, like they felt like he was quite aggressive, had mood swings. One thing his family believes attributed to his mood disorder was that when he was about 12 years old, he was playing ball on his lawn and he was hit by a car. And not just like tapped, like he was hit, he was launched, he like convulsed, the whole thing. It was real, he was really hit, which can definitely lead to detrimental mood disorders. But Christine felt very smitten because he gave her attention. It wasn't always positive, but she was happy to just have somebody's attention. Because of her abandonment issues that she dealt with, she coped by finding relationships that required fixing. If she was fixing a bigger problem than herself, then she believed she was like on the up and up. Although when Christine and Chris first met, drugs weren't her jam, she eventually started experimenting and trying more and more with him. She became very attached to Chris, and that attachment turned into like stage 5 clinger jealousy. It was more on the level of like stage 12. If she thought that she saw him even like glance at another girl, she would flip out. She'd hit him. She'd be like, "Are you gonna leave me for that girl?" His family said she called constantly, like over and over all day long. Like the phones were constantly just clogged up because she was calling, and if he was on the phone with her, he couldn't answer the other line. She would go to the house and like pound on the door and the windows trying to look inside if he wasn't answering, and if he didn't answer and let her in, she would sleep on the front lawn even. The same could be said about Chris though. If you talk to people who knew Christine, he would also tell her things like she could never do better than him, no one would ever love her like he did. He would also embarrass her in group settings by removing her wig. The whole thing was volatile. Right as it was getting to the point where both families were feeling like they couldn't take it anymore, there was a, divine intervention of sorts, if you will, in the form of Chris getting arrested. So with him in jail, this gives the two of them a chance to separate. And during this separation, Christine enrolls in Clear Lake High School. No surprise, kids wear asshats there too. They said she looked like a clown because she wore really heavy makeup. The wig she wore wasn't very trendy, according to them. But at this school, something happened that had never happened before. Two extremely popular girls noticed this and they want to help. It was Rachel and Tiffany, and they made it their mission to take Christine under their wing and just tweak some things. They went with her to get some really trendy clothes. They taught her how to apply makeup much softer. They went and picked out really nice, beautiful wigs with her. Christine's mom said she came home that first day that she met them just so happy. She had never seen her like this, and she was like, "Mom, I met the two most amazing girls in the entire world. They're so kind. They're so nice. I'm so happy." She did a full 180. People at school saw a noticeable difference in her appearance, but they also saw a difference in just her carrying herself with more confidence. It was literally like a movie makeover moment. She went from being this girl who was being picked on, not popular, to having this fairy godmother moment with Tiffany and Rachel. She was actually even voted Miss Irresistible the following year after meeting Tiffany and Rachel. They were so close that they were the only two people in Christine's life besides her family that she felt comfortable enough to not wear her wig in front of. But after Tiffany and Rachel graduate, Christine still had one more year left of high school, so they didn't see each other as often as they had every day when they were in the same school. Rachel and Tiffany also started working at Club Exotica together, and Christine got a job at Walgreens working at the makeup counter. And then eventually she kind of found her way back into a crowd that wasn't, like as ideal. She started drinking a lot, experimenting with pills. And then to add fuel to the fire, Chris is released from jail and they pick up exactly where they left off. They never even skipped a beat. In fact, they were more toxic than they were before. It got to the point where her parents started calling the police on her because she was becoming so violent. There was one incident where she pulled a knife on her parents because they wouldn't let her go and hang out with Chris. I guess she brought Chris around Tiffany and Rachel a couple times at some parties that they were having at their house, and they tolerated him, but they didn't like him. They definitely felt like Christine could do better than him, and they weren't afraid to voice that. They told Christine, like, why are you with him? Like, you can do so much better. You should break up with him. Like, they're just straight up were like, you gotta let him go. So when police are learning about Christine and her relationship with Tiffany and Rachel, they're like, how did she never come up before? What happened was when they went through Rachel and Tiffany's phone records, they only went back 48 hours and they called everybody on the list from that point. But the last time that Rachel and Christine talked was 72 hours, so they never went through those numbers. And they had no reason to go to the high school and question anybody because the girls had already graduated. In hindsight, maybe if they did go, it might have helped things because everybody in the school knew that Christine was so close with Tiffany and Rachel, so she was getting a lot of attention, a lot of sympathy. So as soon as the police hear about Christine, they track down photos of her and Chris and they bring it to the couple that had identified these two individuals that they saw on Tiffany's driveway for the sketch artist, and they had them in a photo lineup for them, and immediately they picked out Christine and Chris. From there, they go straight to Christine's parents' house, but they learned that they haven't seen Christine in months. Her mom assumed that she had relapsed in a big way because she had just turned 18 not that long ago and inherited a large sum of money. She was given about $370,000 from her dad's insurance policy. Christine's mom told them, though, that she thought the best way that they could try to get a hold of her was through Christine's husband because she had recently married, but it wasn't to Chris. During graduation, Christine was actually arrested this time, and part of her sentence was to go to treatment. Her parents said that this was almost a relief for them. They were just like, yeah, this is the best place for you. Like, we're thankful that you got in trouble because now you can finally get away from Chris, which she did. And she was doing well. She seemed to have a clearer head. After she completed treatment, she was focused on just like maintaining a healthy life and started going to a 12-step program. While she's there one evening, she meets this guy named Justin Rott. I guess like everyone in the room parted and their eyes locked like as soon as he walked in. Justin also had a hard upbringing. He also had a lot of abandonment issues from not having his mom in his life since he was 2. He joined the military out of high school, but I guess on one of his leaves, he partied a little too hard with the white stuff and he failed a drug test, so he was discharged. And he just carried on this downward spiral from there and eventually got addicted to heroin. So he had just completed a 21-day program and he was at a halfway house when he met Christine at the 12-step program. And if you've ever been or you have a loved one who's ever been, you know that like one of the main rules is you don't get into a relationship within the first 12 months of your sobriety. And if you've been or if you have a loved one who has been, you also know that this is a rule that is very rarely followed. Understandably, I think people just like feel like that connection. I think they go in it with good intentions, like they can help each other. And not every time, but many times it usually doesn't end well. So a week after this like flirty glance room partying thing, they meet again at a Halloween party that was being held for everybody at the meeting. He shoots his shot. He asks her to dance. They hang out all night. And from that day on, they were hooked. Things moved very fast, so fast that in only weeks of knowing each other, he proposed to her. And then on March 22nd, 2005, less than a year of knowing each other, they eloped. They used some of the money that Christine had inherited to buy a condo. It didn't take long for them to fall back into old habits with that amount of money on hand and just like new sobriety. And as they're heavily using, they're learning more about each other. One night while they're at home, a news segment runs and it's talking about the murders of Tiffany and Rachel, Marcus and Dee. And the police had decided to finally release the sketches that were drawn that they hadn't up until this point. And they wanted to see if this was going to like shake up some new leads, because this was at the point where they had just introduced that $100,000 reward. So I guess when these photos show up on the screen, Christine just loses her mind. She just like shoots up off the couch. She starts pacing back and forth and she's like, oh my God, does that look like me? Does that look like me? Do you think that looks like me? And Justin just like stares at the screen, stares at her, and he's like, yep. But he doesn't like openly say or like want to acknowledge anything. Deep in his heart, he said he knew that she was responsible, but he just coped with it by numbing himself with more drugs. They both did. Apparently, she would try to talk about things with him when they were high, and he would just be like, nope, shh. We aren't going to go there. We're not going to say that out loud. Can't do it. When Hurricane Rita came through in 2004, they left their home. And then from this point, they just hopped from hotel to hotel using more and more drugs, like as they went on. While the pieces are falling in place for detectives behind the scene, Christine and Justin, they've got no idea. They don't even have any idea of what's going on in the outside world, because they had just been isolated in a hotel room for 5 months straight. Literally, she did not leave the hotel room for 5 months. Justin did, to go and like get more drugs or food, but Christine never saw the light of day. And it was estimated that they were using about $500 worth of drugs per day in there. Luckily, police were able to track them down through credit card statements. And on Wednesday, July 19th, 2006, they surround the hotel that they're at La Quinta in San Antonio, Texas. They break the door down. They charge in. The room looks worse than what you would imagine like staging a hotel drug den would look like. It's covered in needles. One of the detectives said there was like some like 56 needles like already pre-lined up, like ready to go with the drugs in them. There was rotten food wrappers and containers everywhere. There was dog poop. There was blood everywhere from like the needle usage. It smelled horrendous. And when they go in, they think that Christine and Justin are dead and that they're too late, but they were just passed out at the time. So they wake them up and bring them in to the station. They're there for like less than 5 minutes, and Justin just lays it all out there. He tells them everything that Christine shared with him. Christine is in the other room and she's pitting everything on Chris. Originally, she says that she wasn't even in the house, that she just waited in the car and that Chris came out and he just said that he killed everybody, but that she never saw anything. And then the detectives are like, nah, that's not what your husband's saying, like next door. He's saying you were very much involved. You admitted to carrying out most of the vicious attacks that happened in the house even. And she's like, I never said that. So then they just keep pressing her to like cut the crap and admit her involvement. And then each time she'd retell the story, Chris would become like more violent and more controlling, and that she was like forced to come to the front door to watch what happened. And then she was forced to go into the living room and hold everybody hostage while he took Marcus to go and get drugs. And then he came back and then he killed everybody in front of her. In the other room, her husband says that according to what she told him, they both went in hard. As soon as Rachel opened the door, they started shooting. She told him that Chris went straight for the drugs and it was her that continued shooting, making sure that the path was clear and that there were no witnesses. And she even told Justin that Rachel's last words to her were, "Why are you doing this?" He also knew one of the most devastating and disgusting pieces of this crime, which was that Chris and Christine had left the house, got into the car, and he was ready to leave. And she said, "I want to go back in and make sure that no one's alive." Chris was like, "No one's alive, we've got to get out of here." And she's like, "Nope, give me 1 second." And so she went back by herself. And that's when she saw that Rachel had reached for her cell phone and she just dialed 911. And before she could press send, she stopped her. When detectives confront her with, "Okay, well, why would your husband make this up and know these details?" she suddenly says that she needs to see a nurse because she's withdrawing from the drugs. So she spends the night in the hospital, and the next night she's brought back in, and this time she's changed her story again. She says they did go there with the intention of getting drugs and money. She was going to hold everybody hostage in the living room while Chris went and got drugs, and she said while she was doing that, she heard a gunshot and knew that Marcus had died. And then Chris comes back into the living room. He is holding his gun in one hand and then puts his hand on her gun and then pulls the trigger on her gun and his gun at the same time. I can't even say it because it's ridiculous. It's fair to say that the detectives also felt like her story was ridiculous because she was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. While this is all going down these past 2 days, there's another team of detectives that's out there looking for Chris. Chris isn't there, but they do find the 2 guns that were used in the murders. While they're raiding the house, his sister and his aunt track him down at his girlfriend's house and let him know that the police are looking for him. And according to his girlfriend, he freaks out. He's trying to delete his MySpace account so that they can't track him through there. He's ripping his phone apart so that they can't trace him on it. And then all of a sudden his girlfriend says he just upped and ran out of the house. He wasn't found until 2 weeks later on August 5th. He was found in a wooded area in South Carolina, and by the time he was found, he had taken his life. So Christine was left to be the only one to go to trial. The trial started in 2008, and her lawyer definitely wanted to focus on the she was forced narrative. Her husband, though, was called to testify, and he pretty much sealed her fate just based on the details that he knew about the crime. And he said that she had talked about it several times, and not one of the times did she ever say to him that she was forced to do something that she didn't want to do. And just based on the crime scene photos, her husband's version does make a lot of sense, that they were just completely caught off guard and ambushed. It looked like the attack either just came out of nowhere as soon as they walked in the door, or they had walked in the door and were hanging out for a little bit and then all of a sudden just took them by surprise, because Tiffany and Dee were sitting on the couch and their legs were propped up and they were just lounging back, very relaxed. So if the version was how Christine said it, where she was forced to stand there and hold them hostage, they wouldn't just be chilling cool as a cucumber with their feet up while she's standing there and he kills Marcus. The jury found her guilty of all 4 counts of murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 40 years. Prosecutors made it very clear that they wanted to go for capital punishment, but because she was 17 when the crimes happened, it wasn't an option. She'll be eligible for parole in 2046, which is a hard pill to swallow. There shouldn't be any chance of parole. Just the heartlessness of these murders. These girls were so good to you. They loved and trusted her. And the boys, like, completely innocent in all of this too. It's just so senseless. And I feel like parole is just, it's too nice. Even if she doesn't get it, like, it's just too nice to even like have the option. I read that George Kalourudis and his older daughter are members of the Missouri chapter of Parents of Murdered Children. They both say that sitting on the board feels kind of therapeutic to them. They're able to help others who are experiencing what they went through, and then, you know, building relationships with people who know exactly how they feel. They said that every time they help a family get through something so traumatic, it almost feels like they're doing work for Rachel, or rather that she's doing work through them, because it's something that she would do, just go and want to help somebody and make their day better. If you or someone you know wants to reach out for help from this group, I've left a link in the description for you. Through that link, they also have an option to donate to the organization. I will be donating a portion of my AdSense to this organization too. It's something that you hope that no one you know ever needs, but the fact that it's there, I mean, is obviously so comforting and needed. All right, you guys, that is it for me today. Very heavy, lots to process here. I think she was very much as an active of a participant as Chris was, but you guys will have to let me know your thoughts. Before I forget the answer to our riddle, I'll remind you of what it was. Two men are locked in a house together. They are told the first man to starve to death loses, and the other man is free to go. Eventually, one man starves to death, but they're unable to tell the other man he won. Why? And the answer is, the first man murdered the second man for food, but since the second man was murdered and didn't starve, the first man didn't win. Therefore, the first man starved, but the second man wasn't alive to enjoy his freedom. I can't wait to hear your guys' answers on that. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. You know it means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.